How you doing today, Ryan?
Pretty good. How about yourself? Just got back in from Buffalo.
Oh, we're doing pretty good. That's right. You were in Buffalo this past entire week, which I guess explains why we're doing this episode over the air.
Yeah, you didn't want to join me and get buffalo wings.
I also very true. Yeah, no, unfortunately, some stuff, some local stuff here at USNI prevented me from coming. But how was Hinsa this year?
It was great to see all the work that they've done on the Sullivans and Croker and Little Rock since I was there probably about 2 years ago. I really love going back to ships that I visited not that far apart and see like just where the maintenance work is happening, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and it's we discussed a couple episodes ago, like Queen Mary in Iowa. You have to go back every so often to see the maintenance that's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would have liked to have been there, but it's just a few things got in the way. It would have been always nice to see Shane and that group and see, like you said, I've actually never been to that park either. So one of these days I'll have to get up there.
Definitely. It's definitely worth your time.
Um, but we're not here today to talk about light cruisers and destroyers and submarines. I guess there's a submarine involved.
Mm-hmm.
And a
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
and cruisers. Okay. Sorry, I take that back. I want to talk about today the only time a U.S. fast battleship was torpedoed. Do you think we can do it?
You're talking about the congressional funding cut that got rid of the Montanas. Congress has destroyed more battleships than all of our enemies put together.
Yeah, those darn treaties and congressmen and oh yeah. Um, you're absolutely right. But for the sake of the actual historical discussion today, let's talk about North Carolina being torpedoed in 1942.
Oh, literal torpedoes.
Yes, literal torpedoes, literal Japanese Type 95 torpedoes. So, do you think we can handle that?
I think we'll get by.
Okay. All right, so let's roll the intro, and then let's go over torpedoing North Carolina. So Ryan, I have a lovely note sheet. See, normally when we film this, my phone is taking the video.
Yeah.
I can't do this, but because I'm sitting here in my house, I can use my phone for this. And Rick has prepared a loved, extremely detailed note sheet for us today, so we don't have to completely wing it.
Can you say why Rick put in so much effort on talking out this timeline? What the research he was doing?
Well, Rick is a North Carolina aficionado. Would we say nerd or enthusiast? Right? I think we like the word enthusiast. But there's been a lot of North Carolina content on the channel, and well, the man loves that ship. So he's been working on the bio for North Carolina's engineering officer for a long time, commissioning engineering officer from Dakin, who eventually would go on to be admiral. Anyway, so he's just really, really into North Carolina. Anyway, so we're gonna talk about. So let's just go through the basic facts really quickly, and then we can discuss some of the interesting points, like I don't know how this actually happened. So let's see here. All right, so while I catch my bearings, do you want to talk about the task forces, like the actual ships involved?
Sure. Sure. So at this time during the Guadalcanal campaign, the U.S. Navy only had a handful of carriers, and we were still practicing individual carrier operations. So each carrier typically operated alone. They operated usually with a cruiser division, about 4 cruisers. By this point in the Guadalcanal campaign, those are really pickup divisions. We're losing so many in surface battles that you don't have just 4 heavy cruisers of the same class that operate together as a division normally. You've got a new light cruiser, and you've got an anti-aircraft cruiser, and you got a couple of the old tin-clads, that whatever you can scrape together. And they'll often operate with 2 divisions of destroyers, usually about 8 of them. But by this point, we've had so much attrition that really, if you've got 1 destroyer division, 4 or 5 boats, you'll be happy with it. And again, these tend to be pickup groups at this point in the war. Oftentimes, the U.S. Navy will try to keep 3 carriers in the area. 1 will be back refueling their task group. The other 2 will be waiting for the Japanese to come. And we're talking about November 1942, when the Japanese are going to make a major push. This is really the climax of both the naval and the land battle at Guadalcanal. We just don't know where or when it's going to happen. So this is taking place a couple of days before the actual nighttime battles that become very famous later on, First and Second Guadalcanal.
Right. And it's important to note, and maybe we should talk about, since you already mentioned the carriers, maybe it is important to discuss the actual carrier force that is out there. So Saratoga is torpedoed twice in 1942 and spends pretty much the entire year being fixed. So you can pretty much just take her off the list. And then you have the 3.5 Yorktowns.
Yeah. Wasp is the half.
Did it take you a second? So obviously, Lexington is lost at Coral Sea earlier, or slightly earlier in the year. This is September of 42 when North Carolina is torpedoed. So Lexington is already gone by that point in time. Saratoga is perpetually in yard, having holes, and then so you have, and of course Yorktown herself has already been lost at Midway. So you're only left with Enterprise, Wasp, and of course Ranger is a Atlantic carrier because of how flimsy it is, even compared to Wasp, the half York. That's it, right? Because we're not commissioning Essex until 43.
Yeah, it'll be mid-43 before we see the first couple Essexes come online. Even the escort carriers aren't really showing up. Langley's been sunk, and Long Island is running aircraft back and forth at really low speed. But you're not going to see like the massed escort carriers popping up for another year at least.
So, and then to explain the half Yorktown, Yorktown and Enterprise are built under treaty limits, and because we have extra tonnage, they take the Yorktown design, modify it, shrink it away, and you end up with CV7 Wasp, which is a lighter version.
Yeah, she's shorter. She's got less armor coverage. She's got less of a propulsion plant. They do test some really neat stuff on her that is going to carry over into the Essex class. And I do love that idea of, we've got this one-off ship. She can't do everything we wanted to do, but we can use her as a test bed for deck edge elevators and a compressed superstructure instead of the huge funnels that the Yorktown class and the Lexington class have. And those all get carried over into future designs. But her low speed, smaller flight deck, smaller hangar, less armor, all are problems.
Then as the treaty situation begins to fail, the U.S. Navy orders another full-size York, which becomes Hornet. That's the part that always kind of confused me, which is why I sometimes flip the two, is because it's like you go 2 full-size Yorktowns, half a Yorktown, and then another full-size Yorktown. So that's just, and then Hornet's the last CV8, and then the Essex class then go on forever until you get to the first of the Midways. So anyway, so there's your history lesson there. So here we are. So that brings us to September 15th, looks like 1942. So you have Wasp is in one task force, and then right adjacent to it is the Hornet force. And they're operating kind of together. Wasp is the carrier that is currently conducting flight operation, and Hornet task force, which includes North Carolina, is kind of matching movement, but it's not itself conducting operations at the time.
Yeah, the U.S. Navy is on the cusp of finally catching up to the Japanese, getting where the Japanese were a year or two ahead of this and doing multi-carrier operations. They're still operating in separate task groups, but they're starting to operate together instead of each carrier task group doing its own stuff. You've got one that's got a deck load strike ready to go, all of its aircraft there, so that if a Japanese carrier is found, they can launch right away. And then you've got one that's got a combat air patrol aloft, that's got dive bombers aloft for scouting, that's got torpedo bombers aloft for anti-submarine patrol. And so only one of those task forces is really being disrupted by flight operations, and the other one is ready to do a full deck alpha strike.
Exactly. So I'm just gonna go over the time stamps here real quickly, and then we can talk about some of these points. So at 1350 on that day, I-19 is that after sort of hearing the task force goes to periscope depth and identifies carrier Wasp. Completely unaware of the second task force, North Carolina, Hornet, all of them. This is just Wasp is front and center to I-19. 1444, so around 15 minutes go by, 25 minutes go by, at 1444:45, I-19 launches 6 torpedoes at Wasp, which apparently is Japanese submarine doctrine to launch all 6 forward torpedoes at 3-second intervals out. Now, at this time, also, I-19 has gotten pretty close to Wasp, and so the carrier is front and center, and that's the primary target. So it fires all 6 torpedoes out at Wasp. And then just a short period after that, noted that Wasp was seen there. Some of the other ships seem to think that it's they're having some sort of aviation accident. Like the fire seems like a plane caught fire on the deck or something. They can't. It's hard to tell. In fact, the carrier has it's actually taken 3 out of the 6 torpedoes, and for the Alpha Yorktown with no underwater protection, taking 3 Type 95 submarine torpedoes is a death sentence. So that's the end of Wasp.
Oh, especially while she's doing flight operations, and then they've got fuel lines running and everything like that. But yeah, that's all she can take.
At 14, so let's keep that number, that time sort of in our heads here, when those torpedoes begin to make contact, and then as we get further and further out here. So known to I-19, you have Hornet Group, which is the trajectory of the torpedoes, but it's so far downrange that there's no way I-19 all the ships and had included them in this torpedo spread. It's just by sheer happenstance. It's just sort of in the line of the torpedoes.
Yeah, the periscope is at sea level, so they can only see a couple of miles in front of them. They can't see another task force several miles away.
But then at 1550, so now 6 minutes has gone by. Destroyer lands down, which is kind of in between the two groups. Messages, I guess, nearly torpedo passes under the destroyer. It's because a destroyer shallow draft. These torpedoes were set at different depths. So obviously battleships and carriers, ride lower. The destroyer lands down, radios. The torpedo just went underneath of a thing heading towards you, except you was transmitted in the open. So who's you? And then let me see here, at 14:51, 1 minute later, destroyer O'Brien, again in the middle of the two groups, turned sharply to avoid one torpedo. Then the second actually hits the destroyer and basically takes the bow off. That's the second ship hit by this torpedo spread. So then at 15:50, 30 seconds. In this case, North Carolina Hornet was already coming right to just as a part of a normal maneuver. The battleship was already coming right to match the carrier. At this point, at 14:50 and 30 seconds, the captain of North Carolina bursts in to the bridge, orders right full rudder, emergency flank speed, and then roughly 30 to 90 seconds later, the torpedo impacts North Carolina around turret 1, frame 46. Oh, the main point here is actually 8 minutes has elapsed from Wasp being torpedoed, then North Carolina being torpedoed. 8 minutes is a huge amount of time. And that's the one point that I wanted to sort of get across. And this is the one thing I wanted to talk to you about, was seems to me very unusual that if you had a carrier and an adjacent task force be torpedoed, it would take so long for that information to get to the rest of the ships.
Yeah, oftentimes torpedoes will knock out other systems, just the shock of being hit by it. So it doesn't entirely surprise me that Wasp isn't able to transmit something right away. Maybe their radio antennas were down, or they lost electrical power, or something like that, and then they're not able to communicate that right away. Also, like you said earlier, nobody really knows that the explosion on Wasp is a torpedo. There was a time when an American scout bomber dropped a dive bomb on a Japanese aircraft carrier. It could be something like that happening here. It could be just an explosion. You're loading bombs and fueling aircraft. Like, aircraft carriers are dangerous places. So that explosion could be anything. And this particular patch of water south of the Solomon Islands, where the U.S. carriers like to operate, doesn't really become named Torpedo Junction until today. Like, Saratoga getting torpedoed is a one-off thing. Now that we've had 4 ships torpedoed in this patch of water, it's no longer a coincidence. This is where Japanese carriers are operating because they know that's where, or Japanese submarines are operating because they know that's where American carriers are operating.
So, well, exactly. And so for that very reason, this is my biggest issue with this entire engagement, is Japanese submarines are known to be out here. Okay, that's fine. But if because 2 destroyers have interactions with torpedoes, one gets hit and one radios that one just went underneath of it. If 8 minutes is a long time, and I've said this already, but it is a long time. And if you are getting open air reports of destroyers getting hit and torpedoes passing under destroyer, you already have one carrier burning. It would seem that my first reaction would be to scatter.
I mean, you're operating in the middle of a task force, especially your capital ships like the battleships and carriers. You can't really scatter without risk of running down the small boys. Altering course does make sense.
That's what I mean by scatter. Sorry. like altering course in an erratic way. And so I don't mean to cut you off, Ryan, but my point was, like, if you know that, because the Japanese torpedoes, like the submarine captain, like had to have like visually identified your ship, lined his ship up with you, calculated the range and the trajectory, fired. So the moment you change course and speed, you've immediately thrown off that calculation. So in my mind, it's like the moment ships begin to interact with torpedoes, if you need to alter course in some way. That's not what you were just doing a few minutes ago.
Oh, an American torpedo that you launch at one carrier group is not going to have the range to make it to another carrier group. An American torpedo isn't still going to be sailing 8 minutes later. So yeah, that task force was a task force 17 over there. It is taking torpedoes. That's horrible. Over here in task force 18 miles away, we don't need to worry about that.
And that seems to be a known issue with American intelligence about Japanese torpedoes. About the oxygen-fueled, super long range, decent, speed capability of Japanese torpedoes, whether that's the submarine variant, the cruiser, destroyer variants, they're all basically the same thing, just slightly modified for their application. So the fact that those torpedoes have the range to make it through one entire task force, the gap between the second and then enter second and then strike ships. So to your point, I think that's just something that they were completely unaware of. But that doesn't also mean that there couldn't be a second submarine. I believe at the time it was thought that I-15 was also in this engagement. And so there could still be multiple Japanese submarines. Just because torpedoes are hitting Wasp doesn't mean that's the one and only submarine that's targeting you.
And that's a very good point. The U.S. Navy has encountered Wolfpack tactics in the Atlantic already by this point. Admiral Lockwood and his submariners are developing Wolfpack tactics that the U.S. Navy will start to use as more of our fleet boats start to deploy. So it is something known, and we do see after North Carolina's hit that she starts to maneuver, and that very much is likely. Okay, we've taken a hit. There could be more submarines out here, and they might have us surrounded. So we're really going to alter course and speed and everything.
Do you think that if you had, so that there's two things going, there's like two schools of like thought here. If you know that you need to avoid a torpedo, you obviously need to put on the speed. And if you are just reacting to the idea that a torpedo might be coming, I would say that it's a fair assumption to order the increase in speed. So do you agree with the captain's choice to come in and be like, finally something has registered, we need to increase speed? So go from, I think they were already operating at like 19 knots. Even with a gigantic hole blown in the side, North Carolina then manages to actually go up to her full speed. So I think she manages like 27, 28 knots with a hole blown in the side, blown open.
So as a historian who knows that there's only one submarine there and knows that they fired all 6 of their forward tubes already, no, it doesn't make sense to go up to full speed, because that's going to cause more water to enter the bow of the ship. It's potentially going to do more damage. It'll open that hole up more, might start to put pressure on your internal bulkheads and cause those to spring. But as North Carolina's captain, not knowing where the heck that torpedo just came from, starting to realize that I'm in a patch of ocean that we're going to call Torpedo Junction very soon, and knowing that we just took one hit, absolutely, I push the throttle down, I throw the helm far over, and hope that that's going to throw off any other torpedo heads.
So in this instance, North Carolina, like I said, was already coming to the right to match maneuver from Hornet, because that North Carolina is in front of Hornet and it's trying to match these positions. So it's interesting, because had Hornet not made that right turn, it looked like the torpedo would have just come down sort of the side of North Carolina. Is by making that right turn, you actually put yourself into that angle where the torpedo makes contact. Of course, you don't know where the torpedo is coming from. It's not like the torpedo that hits North Carolina was spotted. So you don't know if it's coming left, right, front, back. So it would be impossible to try to steer like into or away from the torpedo in this case. However, and this is just for the sake of the argument here, if you did know that that torpedo was coming at you from the left in this case, and you're already turning to the right, and you could visually identify it, what would you have done?
There's two schools of thoughts to this. Both of them revolve around putting your narrowest side facing the torpedo, whether that's your bow or your stern. One school of thought is you turn away from the torpedo. That's going to have you running parallel to it, and that's going to buy you a lot of time because you're now subtracting your own ship speed from the torpedo speed. So that'll give you more time to see that it's coming and adjust to be able to, especially if there's a full spread coming at you, and you might end up being able to adjust to get between them. But that puts your most vulnerable spot in front of the torpedo, your rudders and your propellers. And a hit there is disabled, mission kill, you're done. So the other school of thought.
Do you have examples?
Battleships hitting torpedoes or propellers. Oh, man.
You can't see it. It's up there.
Yeah. Bismarck is one great example. Prince of Wales is another. Both of them seem to have taken it from a side hit, possibly. Bismarck's might have gone up the stern. The other alternative, of course, is to turn bow in. Your bow can take that hit. Your bow is the narrowest part of the ship, but now you're closing with that torpedo and you have less time to maneuver.
So absolutely right. For the World of Warship players or anyone who's had to make that maneuver in like the video game sense. Now, again, video games are different than real life, but and this is why I wanted to ask you this question specifically, because I want to know. This is the part that real life is different than the video game. So let's just say you spot the torpedo.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what the differences would be for the actual maneuver here. If the torpedo's coming in from the left, right? If I order hard left, like I'm going to turn into, and I order their full stop or full, like all but full.
Mm-hmm.
What are the chances of the ship making that maneuver versus if I say full hard to right and full ahead? So if holding all else equal,
Mm-hmm.
and let's just say the ship is on a trajectory that if I do nothing, it will hit, right? What are the chances of one working versus the other? So before, I want to get your opinion, but in my mind, it would be much easier for the ship from the moment I order all back and hard over to the left. In my mind, slowing the ship begins immediately from the moment they take the foot off the gas, so to speak, and I can immediately then begin to come over to the left. Versus full ahead takes a lot longer to respond. It's not like a car where you just mat the throttle and you see that instant increase in torque on your shafts and the ship begins to increase. So what do you have a thought?
Yeah, because of your own inertia and how long it takes to change over a 600-pound steam boiler and everything else, it could take up to 20 minutes in order from the bridge to turn into the speed that the bridge ordered. So if you're doing 19 knots, you want to bring the ship up to 27 knots for max speed. I expect that to take 20 minutes as they swap out fuel nozzles to boil more water to allow the turbines to spin faster, and then for the ship to overcome its own inertia and to actually start moving faster. Slowing down is a more immediate thing, but again, you've still got a lot of forward momentum, so it will not be immediate. You are going to continue to drift forward, even if you start to crash back and send the steam into the turbines the opposite way, so the propellers spin the opposite way. Battleships tend to be more maneuverable at lower speeds, i.e. at max speed, the turning radius is going to be larger than at a really reduced speed.
I tried to explain. So I tried to explain this to you before, like last time I saw you. But obviously, like the length of the ship has to do with that. So like it's why sports cars are 2-seat sports cars with shorter wheelbases turn better than large SUVs, because the longer your ship or car is, the harder it is. But battleships, or ships in general in this case, are rear steer and rear drive. So you have all this force specifically at the back, whether that's turning or pushing. And just like in a car, the pushing forward force will always do better than your turning force, which is why front wheel drive cars are terrible. And you prefer, like, you don't see, like, NASCAR is not front wheel drive for a reason. Like F1 is not front wheel drive for a reason. So as your ship is at maximum speed, the front force of the propellers will always overpower the steering force of the rudders. So you'll get that sort of understeer effect. Of course, if the moment you let off the throttle, so to speak, you know what I mean, the rudder begins to take back some of that force. So there you go. There's your quick physics.
And while we're diving deep into way too many things for a captain to think about in a spur of the moment decision, large ship lean out of the turn. So if you are turning towards a torpedo,
it lifts that side out of the water.
Exactly. So it is more likely to hit on the torpedo defense beneath the belt. You turn towards the torpedo, it lifts the opposite side out of the water, it submerges your belt. Now, why you would want the torpedo to not hit the belt, the most armored part of the ship, is because that belt is incredibly rigid, and an explosion on the belt might rip it along the entire seam where that belt joins the lower hull, or where two sections of belt come together. Much easier to fix a hole that's flooding one or two compartments than an entire ripped seam, which is why torpedo defenses are thin and elastic plates, so they will absorb an impact and crush, but limit that to the area where they are, as opposed to something hard that just rips across.
So you would agree then, if by turning into the torpedo, you lift that side of the ship out, so the torpedo is more likely to hit the torpedo defense than if you turned away from it, then the belt would lean into the water, and then the torpedo could hit the armor belt.
Yes.
Okay. So we're establishing here that the idea of turning away from the torpedo is, while again not in the moment, it would have been possible to know, but the idea of turning away from the torpedo is not the greatest thing.
No. And we see this with Yamato at Samar. Johnston shoots a spread of torpedoes at her. Yamato turns away from the torpedoes, buys her enough time. American torpedoes are a lot slower than Japanese torpedoes. They happen to be very similar in speed to a Yamato-class battleship. So Yamato ends up combing the trail of these torpedoes for miles, sailing away from the battle with the admiral in charge of the whole fleet on it. So I do believe that even though it buys you less reaction time, turning into a torpedo and putting your bow there is the better decision. Plus, damage to your bow is much more repairable than damage to your rudders and propellers, and I would take sure damage to my bow over possible damage to my stern.
We often laugh because North Carolina takes the torpedo hit right where you and I always claim that American fast battleships are the absolute weakest. which is ironic. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, taking the torpedo on the bow is preferred, but the bow forward of the armored bulkhead, forward of the turret, she takes it adjacent to turret number one. And on American fast battleships, to get that speed, they have to have a very narrow hull forward compared to the very, very full hull aft. Because the hull is so narrow forward, there isn't enough room for the full torpedo defense that the Navy prefers. For fast battleships, that's about 22 feet at the bottom. But adjacent to turret number one, you lose a couple of feet because you have to have the magazines and the barbette for that turret. If these ships were not restricted by weight, they would be longer and heavier, but that tapering would start forward of the turret. But because they're restricted by weight, the turret has to be pushed forward into an area that isn't quite wide enough for it.
And you see that if you look down at the top down sort of profile, like the deck plan of an Iowa class battleship, you see the tape, how it right there at turret one gets pretty skinny. And then if you look down at like a Montana design, you can see that the tapering is a lot less, but it also happens further forward.
Yeah, it's definitely the most obvious when you look at an Iowa class battleship, but the South Dakotas and the North Carolinas suffer from the exact same problem. And it was a known problem, but it was something that the U.S. Navy had to accept. It's just a perfect example of Murphy's Law, that of these 10 fast battleships that are completed, they're involved in a single torpedo attack, and that single torpedo hit happens in the one like frame number range that is potentially deadly to these ships.
Right. So I guess in this case now, because of the fact that you do have these two separate task forces, North Carolina isn't even like, it is such a surprise that the ships aren't even at action stations. So like, the torpedo hits in was it in like a crew washroom? Like, if I'm not mistaken, like and then there was a couple guys who were in that space who were killed. And then that's what prompts the whole inquiry into the situation and everything, because there were casualties as a result of this.
Yeah, in a good day, the torpedo defense system should be able to absorb that. But this torpedo defeats the torpedo defense, gets into the berthing spaces beyond it, gets into some of the magazine spaces around the turret, which is where it could really be deadly. And part of this problem is the U.S. Navy does not know how good everybody else's torpedoes are or their shells. So U.S. Navy armor is designed against our own torpedoes, our own shells. So she's armored to take a hit from something with like an 800-pound warhead, and she's facing something that has a significantly larger sized warhead. And that's not a problem specifically with the U.S. Navy or with U.S. Navy intelligence at this time. This is how everybody's navies are doing it. It's kind of rare that you're able to get the exact specifications of somebody's war beating technology like these Japanese air-fueled torpedoes. So everybody is designing their ships against their own size stuff. And like nobody knew that the U.S. Navy had super heavy shells. So nobody's armor was designed to resist that. We didn't know that the Japanese had these torpedoes. So our torpedo defense is not designed to resist that.
And even in the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, like they were examining the torpedo impacts of some of these Pearl Harbor battleships. And you could even tell then that something was slightly off. The impacts, I think, from those aerial torpedoes were still, there was something about the way that the actual explosion happened that was warping and bending this metal. And they were like, it's a little different than I think we're used to, but I think it was just kind of lost in the moment.
It's very easy to look at it and be like, well, this hole is bigger than it should be, but these ships are all 20 years old. They weren't designed with good torpedo defense, and most of them have it as an afterthought bolted on, and clearly that hasn't performed as well as it should have. And then watertight doors weren't closed, so it was able to penetrate much further than it should have been able to. Like you can come up with justifications for why it did more damage. That isn't, what if the Japanese are using a torpedo that's twice as powerful as ours?
So in this case, so in the U.S. Navy essentially said the same thing of all the stuff we've been talking about, which is why Captain of North Carolina, like, obviously is cleared of any sort of wrongdoing, and ultimately goes on and makes admiral himself. So it's not we're not trying to find fault in the captain in any way, because again, without knowing, no idea that this was even coming. He did no idea where it was coming from or how far or anything. So it makes perfect sense.
We're sitting here discussing with full hindsight what a perfect best case scenario would be. And quite frankly, the reason we talk about today at all is because it is, by pure misfortune, it's pure luck, the absolute worst case scenario, that a torpedo could miss the ship it was aimed for, travel miles, and then randomly pick a patch of ocean to explode where there happens to be another ship.
Yeah, so ultimately, this goes down as the luckiest torpedo spread in history. The Japanese submarine fires 6 torpedoes at a single carrier, hits 3, and then 2 of the other 3 that miss the carrier then go on to hit a destroyer and hit a battleship. It's incredible.
It really is, because you've got 2 carrier task forces that are operating and sailing in different directions, but they just happen to be lined up with the submarine shooting straight through them. If anything had been different and one of the carrier task forces had been slightly offset from the other, this doesn't happen at all.
It's incredibly lucky.
If Japanese fire control computers were better, then this hit doesn't happen. And I'll tell you why I think that. So just got back from HINSA, and we got to see Terry Lindell gave a tremendous program on American fire control computers, particularly the TDCs Mark III and IV that are on the museum submarines. And he's one of the few people on the planet who can actually service these analog fire control computers still in the 21st century. And somebody asked him a really fantastic question of, well, how did this technology compare to what everybody else was using? And the answer is, because our fire control computers are so good, we can fire our torpedoes accurately from more than 4 miles away. The Baltic U-boats can't do that. Japanese I-boats can't do that. Like, nobody else in the world can do this, which means that I-19 gets right up close to us.
Yeah.
Which means that for really long-range oxygen-fueled torpedoes can travel for another 8 or 10 minutes after passing Wasp and still hit something in a completely different task force. An American submarine would have made that shot from 4 times as far away, and they would have probably hit Wasp. It's a very accurate fire control system, but those torpedoes would not have had the range to go past Wasp and hit other targets.
Yeah. No, that's such an interesting concept. The idea that you fire a full spread of 6 because, again, like you said,
Half of them are going to miss even at point blank range.
You're really close, and even the torpedo has enough range to still do another, all these miles, 8-10 minutes more at 45 knots. This thing is absolutely incredible. And so, exactly. And if you look at it on the map anyway, I mean, North Carolina turning into the torpedo is just an accident because of Hornet turning. So, all these things. But in terms of damage per dollar, that's probably the best or yen or whatever they were using. That torpedo spread was probably the most cost-effective spread in naval history.
Easily.
However, as we've talked about in our other North Carolina videos, North Carolina being the first of the fast battleships is also the first thrown into the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because of this torpedo hit that North Carolina then has to return to Pearl Harbor to be fixed. But it's also when North Carolina goes back and they're like, take all these 50 caliber machine guns off, take all these 1.1s off, and oh look, here's 20s, and here's your 40s. So it's so the Japanese are like, so it's like, okay, you take North Carolina out of the fight, you sink Wasp, but then North Carolina goes back and gets that because of this torpedo hit. She goes back to Pearl Harbor and receives a really much needed overhaul and then refit, and then comes out a much more lethal fighting machine. So there's something,
there's something there, but she misses the rest of the critical Guadalcanal campaign. So she's not there to operate with Willis Lee or to protect the carrier. She's not protecting Hornet when Hornet is lost. And her aircraft defense, as much lighter as it was at that time, might have made the difference in that engagement, because Enterprise with the battleship escort does survive the day.
Yeah. So who knows how that works? The trade-offs that are made. Now, real quick before we wrap it up, New Jersey and Iowa were almost torpedoed when they were doing the attack on Truck Lagoon.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just now like those ships in that engagement, North Carolina, these fast battleships, I don't think the U.S. Navy or the admirals in charge really knew how to or appreciated the concept of the fast battleship. And so a lot of times you see the battleships being put into cruiser positions. So North Carolina is really in a cruiser position in the carrier task force. Iowa and New Jersey are being used by Spruance, who's a cruiser admiral, as basically just gigantic heavy cruisers, which, they're fast enough. So, why not? If you're a cruiser admiral, you're like, I don't need Indianapolis. Give me this New Jersey.
Battleship admirals need a battle line. They need a dozen battleships to be able to operate. Even vaunted battleship commander Willis Lee, sailing into Iron Bottom Sound with 2 battleships, he essentially maneuvers them completely separately. He doesn't fight a line of battle engagement. South Dakota is not under his command at all, does her own thing, and Washington is maneuvering completely independently. It's less that they don't know how to use them and more that we have not been given enough battleships to use the tactic we've been trained, to use the doctrine we've been given, and we haven't been given an enemy to fight who has their own battle line that matches what our doctrine tells us we should be fighting.
So that's my point. So now we're using all these fast battleships like large, heavy cruisers.
Which makes sense given how many cruisers are being attrited in the waters around Guadalcanal.
Exactly. We lose quite a few before. And of course, this is before like the mass building wave happens and you get all of a sudden more Baltimores and Clevelands and you know what to do with. So, no, absolutely. For North Carolina, but hey, she's still here today, right?
She absolutely is.
It's very pretty. I think that wraps up. Do you have anything more to say about this? I know this was kind of very hyper specific, but I thought it would be a fun topic to do.
I do think it's worth pointing out that weather plays a factor. Like the Japanese had every bit of luck they possibly could, which I'm not saying to try and talk down about how much skill they showed managing to maneuver that close to an actively hunting them carrier task force. But they had luck in that the weather was kind of choppy seas, and so it was hard to see periscopes. It was hard to see torpedo wakes. And you see the opposite of that year and a half later when Iowa and New Jersey have torpedoes fired at them. Beautiful weather. Everybody sees the torpedoes coming, and those ships are able to maneuver and avoid them.
And then the other example is at Torch, Massachusetts. French submarine fires torpedoes at Massachusetts, and she was able to see the torpedoes, identify, and she turns into the torpedoes, I believe, in that example, if I'm not mistaken. So there's again more things right there where we're turning in. We've visually identified a spread of torpedoes, and we have enough time to make a decision, and she turns into them. So I think that's kind of my point, is that if you have the information, that's what you would do. So yeah, that's right. I almost forgot about that. So anyway, well, it was good to see you, Ryan. Hopefully I can see you in October because I think we're going to do some Navy 250th stuff and be able to film a few more episodes for the next couple of months.
Sounds good to me. I'll see you in October.
Yeah, so we don't have to do this again. It's okay. It's fun. All right. Thanks for the talk. I'll see you later.
See you next time.
All right. Bye.